Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. I'm really excited about sharing this particular project with you today, so hi, hope you're having a gorgeous day. I thought it would be fun if I took you along with me through the process of filling one of my sketchbook pages recently. I want to show you how I set up my still life reference, take my pictures, do some experiments, and finally move on to paint in my sketchbook. I was really wanting to paint some oranges, so I went out and bought myself some oranges, different varieties, different sizes, different colors. I got some lemons and I also got some sweet limes. I actually really enjoyed opening everything up and cutting my fruit and having my whole room smell of it, so that was wonderful. Anyway, along with the fruit, I went around the house to look for some other elements that I could include in my setup. I wanted everything to fit in a warm, natural color palette, and I wanted to bring in some visual interest using different textures. So I had the texture of the fruit, I had the different types of cloth, the wrinkles, the glass and the copper jug, the clay teacup and the plates, just a bunch of different textures to create a sense of contrast in that aspect. All of the colors are under the same umbrella, so I wanted to make sure that I had some variation in the textures at least. I also made sure I wasn't including items of too similar sizes. I even cut up some oranges so I'd have that lovely inside fruit showing as well. I really played around with these props, and as you can see, I went through several different arrangements, a few different combinations of items, and I took a bunch of pictures to use as reference. Before I moved on to paint in my sketchbook, I decided to do a little experiment on my iPad. I made a digital painting to help me understand the colors so that I had a better idea of how to approach it. And once I felt confident, I moved on to my sketchbook. And also, I just really wanted to make a still life digital painting. I mostly only do portraits or master studies using my iPad, so this was really fun to try out. Before I got to the painting, I had to sketch it out. I've been getting really used to just going into my paintings without an initial sketch, but the reference I chose seemed it was a little intimidating, so I wanted to have a proper foundation before I began. I've used a reddish brown colored pencil to create the sketch, and I'm focusing on getting the shapes and the proportions correctly. And I'm not too worried about, recreating the reference exactly. I decided to use my gouache paints for this in my sketchbook, and I approached it like an oil painting. I covered the entire page with a burnt sienna as a base, midtone, to build all of my shadows and highlights on. It's a little tricky working with gouache this way, since the colors layered on top may sometimes pick up the brown underneath since it gets reactivated, but that doesn't really bother me too much. I think it makes all of the colors look cohesive, and I can take a little bit of the color mixing pressure off of myself. I started with the teacup. It seemed fairly easy, and I've painted quite a few teacups before, so this felt quite familiar. I was debating at this point whether I wanted to change up the colors from the reference, maybe add a few hue shifts perhaps, or make the shadows prominently purple or something like that. But I decided against it. I really loved the colors of the reference that I chose. They're really refreshing and earthy at the same time, and I wanted to capture that. So I tried my best to stick to the original colors. After the teacup, we moved on to the fruits, the whole reason this painting happened, and let me tell you, these were really tricky. I was so excited to paint the oranges, and then I got to it and I'm stumped. I feel I did a decent job emulating the different textures in my picture, but when it came to the fruit, I was just lost. My goal was to simplify my shapes and my brushstrokes, but there is so much detail that's essential to the texture of the cut fruit, and it essentially makes up the texture itself, the highlights and the bumps and everything. And I was getting so confused finding the right balance of detail and simplification in this part of the painting. Obviously, I will get better at this with practice, and I intend to use all the 500 different reference photos that I took to their fullest potential. But I wanted to share this. It was a little disheartening, the focal point of my painting. The inspiration is what I was struggling with the most, but regardless, I think I did a decent job. I am still a little mad, but I'm actually really proud of the painting as a whole, so we're okay. Now moving on to my favorite part of this painting, the copper jug. I am so impressed with myself and how I painted this jug. After the sadness from the fruits, moving on to this was like a full-on confidence boost. I really enjoyed painting the copper texture, the slight greenish browns near the highlights themselves, the reflection of the cloth next to it. I'm just really happy with how this turned out. And on a closer look, you can see the lovely texture of the paintbrush, the brushstrokes. It just gives me so much joy. It was really interesting because of the nature of this copper jug. I had to paint cool tones and warm tones of the brown in the same area, not even affected by shadow. I thought it would look a bit odd, I guess, having different temperatures of the brown next to each other, not separated by light and shadow, but turns out that actually adds to the look of copper. It was very interesting trying to figure this out and, I guess, not confuse myself. I had to keep reminding myself to pay attention to the colors in the photo and paint what I see and not paint what I think it should look like, if that makes sense.
Places it had wanna be, and how many days when I could have stayed instead of just getting up to leave. And given we make time, I'll meet you down the line. A long coat, walking on a New York street, a pack of crushed cigarettes.
You can see here now I'm painting the tiny lemon, and I am not happy with this one at all. It was such a roller coaster moving from the oranges to the jug to this. And it was the same issue here, my confusion with trying to find the balance between detail and simplicity, but it was so much more multiplied because of the size. If you take a closer look, you can tell I wasn't sure what I was doing here. The brushstrokes are quite messy, and you can barely figure out the anatomy of the piece of lemon. But anyway, I moved on convincing myself that this is a stylistic choice, but again, definitely need practice painting the insides of fruits.
when hair could have stayed instead of just getting up to leave.
Moving on, I was very excited to paint the pieces of cloth. I do struggle with this a bit, painting folds and stuff, but I think I did a really good job making the folds look interesting in context to the composition of this reference when I was doing the setup. So I was very excited to paint that.
And all the days
I did mess up a bit with the colors initially. I didn't mix them too well. They were a little warm, I think. So I went over those areas again, really consciously mixing the right colors this time. I've noticed if I try to rush mixing my colors, I always 100% will mess up. But when I take it slow and make a conscious effort of keeping color theory in mind, I do a much better job. Hopefully, I'm hoping through practice this would start to come to me naturally, but for now, honestly, it takes me quite some brain power to properly mix my colors. If there was one thing that I had to pick to say that this is what I enjoyed the most about this painting, I would pick the reflections of the oranges on the white cloth. The little tiny areas of yellow and orange being reflected from the fruits onto the folds. There was something about that I really enjoyed painting. I think small details like this bring the whole piece together. You're able to feel the atmosphere of the painting, you're able to imagine the physical space these elements are in because of the way they interact with the other elements. So these reflections from the oranges or the reflections of the cloth on the copper jug, it really adds to the overall ambience. I also really enjoyed how painterly the cloth looks. By this time, my paintbrush had started to give up on me and it was like fraying almost. You could really see the texture of the separated brush hairs, and I was using that to my advantage. I think it looks really nice. It makes it look like rough almost. I really like that. I definitely chose to skip over some details of the white cloth, but I'm really happy with how this turned out. Once that was done, it was time for some final touches. I went in with some really dark colors to add some definition to the edges of everything. I wanted to define the edges of the teacup, the oranges, and the jug. So I did this sort of broken outline thing in selective areas, mostly areas of shadow, so that they wouldn't get lost. I also added in some highlights. I added the date and then I wrote the word fruit because I didn't know what else to write. And then I was done.